Well, Russians are beginning to flee the country to avoid being forced to fight in the war against Ukraine after a mandatory troop call-up began last week. Joining us live is the former US Special Representative to Ukraine, Kurt Volker. Kurt, appreciate your time this morning. What does this say to you, the fact that this is the next move, according to Vladimir Putin? He's encouraging as many people as possible to go in and fight, and if they don't, they'll presumably be sent off to prison or even in the gulags. What does that say to you, big picture?
Yeah, it shows an extraordinary level of desperation on Putin's part. The military that he had well-trained and well-equipped and sent into Ukraine has been largely defeated. They can't advance any further into Ukraine, and they don't have the resources to give to that military. So he tried originally to go for a voluntary increase in the size of the Russian military force. He announced it about 3 weeks ago, an increase of 137,000. That did not work. So now he has gone to a mandatory increase of saying that he's calling up reservists, 300,000. That's also not going to go very well. As you see, there are protests against it. There are people trying to flee the country. And even those who are successfully forced into the military service will be poorly motivated, very little training, and they don't have the equipment to give to them. So they're just going to be cannon fodder thrown into this conflict, which is, again, why they want to leave the country rather than be put in that situation. Add to that some of the other things, the brandishing a nuclear threat in order to try to scare off the West, going shopping for arms in North Korea or Iran. These are all signs that things are not going well for Putin, and he knows it.
I remember, years ago, it was a different war, but when fighters from Syria were fighters in Iraq, rather, laid down their arms and tossed their uniforms to the side because the Syrians were going to be too strong to roll over them. I mean, could there be something similar that happens this time around in Europe?
Well, I don't think it's going to be that dramatic that quickly.
Yeah.
But I do think that the dynamic is in favor of Ukraine. They have the motivation, they have the personnel, they have good training, they have continuing supplies of very good Western military equipment that is knocking out the Russians' ability to sustain their forces in the field, to hold the territory that they've already taken. The Russians, and the Russian soldiers in particular, know this. And so they are very reluctant to fight. They are trying to pull back as much as possible. And you're seeing the strains in the system because everything that we've just heard about, all these announcements coming from Russia, are evidence of strain inside the system.
So if this doesn't work, do you fear what comes next? And in particular, the nuclear button?
Right. So this is a very serious point, that Russia does have nuclear weapons. I don't think it would launch strategic nuclear weapons against the U.S. or its allies, but there is a risk of tactical nuclear weapons being used on the battlefields in Ukraine. Here, I think two things are important. One of them is that it would not achieve a military purpose. Russia is trying to seize and hold territory in Ukraine, and it's not going very well. Using nuclear weapons there would mean the territory would be completely uninhabitable, and Russia would not be able to achieve its objectives. The other side of it is the warning, and that was given again by Jake Sullivan on television shows this morning here in Washington, National Security Advisor, saying that Russia would face devastating consequences if they used nuclear weapons at all. And I think that is something the Russian military understands very well, that they would lose significant military capacity based on conventional strikes against them if there was any use of nuclear weapons.
Just a final one here, Kurt. How interested were you in the tone of the language from China and even India over the past couple of days when it comes to Russia, and are you buying it?
Well, very, very interesting. I think Putin was counting on some political or moral support, if nothing more, from Xi and perhaps Modi, or at least opportunistic behavior from them. Okay, we'll buy some Russian energy on the cheap, or we'll commit to some kind of financial transactions with Russia. He got quite the opposite. He got a brushback from both Xi, and he had to acknowledge that Xi raised concerns about the war in Ukraine, and from Modi, and I would add also from Erdogan, who Erdogan has tried to play a balancing role between Ukraine and Russia, but Erdogan met with him and told him, you have to stop the war.
Kurt Volker, appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for joining us.